So for now, it seems that we might have avoided a trade war between the world's two superpowers, as the two sides assured each other that they are still friends. But experts say it's too early to let our guards down because China and the U.S. are determined to protect their national interests and pursue their political agendas. Tensions between Beijing and Washington were high in recent months, not only with trade, but also over issues surrounding Taiwan. And to tell us more about the ongoing power game between the two countries, Dr. Bong Young-shik, a researcher at the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies, joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Pleased to be here.
All right, so President Trump vowed friendship with his Chinese counterpart despite their trade differences, as the U.S. hoped to calm market fears over trade war. But now, should we really not worry about a potential trade war between these two economic giants?
Well, of course, there are lots of areas of competition and disputes between two giants, United States and China, but at the same time, the power of interdependence will eventually prevail. So we don't have to worry about the exacerbation of the so-called trade war.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it a trade war. It's just a trade friction, which is still very distant from actualization of all our trade war between the two big economies. Of course, there's a worrisome trend in international affairs for many countries, especially powerful countries, to combine or link political issues with economic issues,
Right.
rather than separating the security issues and the economic issues, which used to be the usual pattern in the past. For instance, in the name of America First policy, the Trump administration did not waste any political power to pressure even its security partners in Europe and Asia. And China also flexed its muscles using its economic influence in order to achieve security gains. The THAAD deployment,
Right.
the terminal high-altitude missile defense system of the U.S. Forces stationing in South Korea, and China's economic retaliation to South Korea's decision for it is a good example. And the news report just mentioned about discovery of 16 million tons of the rare earth by Japan,
Right.
which is good news for Japan because when there was an island dispute over Senkaku in Japanese, Daiota in Chinese in 2012, the Chinese government pressured Japan by suspending the export of rare earth, the mineral vital to the production of the electronics and the semiconductor products for Japanese companies, and Japan basically yield to the pressure by China. But at the same time, we should not dismiss the growing power of economic interdependence. China and the United States in 2018 are totally different from the former Soviet Union and the United States in 1981. They are so economically intertwined and interdependent. So trying to hurt the other economy for the sake of satisfying their domestic industries and consumers will eventually backfire. Although the Trump White House has announced a list of the items subject to potentially 25% of the tariff by mobilizing the Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Acts, which authorized the president to respond to a foreign government action that violates the fair trade practice in order to protect domestic industries and consumers. But we only studied the investigation period, which will last for 60 days.
Okay.
So until mid-August, we are not going to even have the first day of so-called retaliation by the United States to China. And China also published its own list of the U.S. imports,
Right.
106 items imported from U.S., like soybeans, automobile, and airplanes, which will be subject to the 25% tariffs. But these are only in the very early stage of investigation. So until the list of the items which will actually subject to the imposition of 25 tariffs, according to the Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act by the United States, and the Chinese government doing the same toward the United States in August, we still have time for these two countries to come up with the solutions. And 37% of all the so-called Chinese imports are intermediary products for U.S. companies for the manufacturing of their products. So if these Chinese imports will be subject to the higher tariff, then it will hurt the profitability of the U.S. companies. Let's wait until mid-August how the Trump administration will actually move with the Section 301.
It definitely seems like the two sides have appropriate weapons in place to fight each other. But even if these trade issues are settled, though, the U.S. and China are still in conflict over various political issues, including the one that we just mentioned on Taiwan. Now, tell us more about this.
Well, Taiwan has been the main, I would say, the stone in the shoes for U.S.-China relations. But since normalization in 1979, United States has consistently maintained the one China policy, that there is only one China and Taiwan is part of China. So it is too early to say that Trump administration has deviated from this U.S. position in support for the one China policy. Of course, the Trump administration has relaxed the travel restriction on the higher-ranked officials on both sides to travel in Taiwan and the United States. And the Chinese government vehemently protested this change. But this is very much a reminiscence of what happened during the Clinton administration in mid-1990s, when then Taiwan President Lee Teng-hui using the tourist visa to visit his alma mater, Cornell University, as a private capacity. And the Chinese government responded with demonstration of armed forces in the form of missile test right across the Taiwan Strait. There was a Taiwan Strait crisis of 1995 and 1996. But the Clinton administration at the time quickly restored the mutual understanding that the United States still supported the one China policy. So I would expect that the Trump administration would decide to just assure the Chinese government that nothing fundamental has been changed when it comes to U.S. supporting the one China policy.
So definitely it's a sensitive issue, and it's going to be an ongoing issue between the two sides. But what about the dispute over South China Sea?
It is another matter that China wants to exert and increase its presence of sovereign rights over territories, like the Taiwan issue. Taiwan issue is one of the key issues when it comes to sovereign integration of China as one country for Chinese people and their government. And the same mindset has been reflected in China's rather aggressive policy to protect and convert a lot of small islands into basically military naval bases and artificial islands, which United States government and other countries in Southeast Asian region protest as a violation of their sovereign rights and the violation of the principle of the freedom of navigation, FON in short. But at the same time, as I said, that China and the United States shared a great deal of the common interest in maintaining the free and safe passage of ships in South China Sea. And China also does not want to turn ASEAN countries in South Asia hostile to China, because China is basically encircled by countries that are not always friendly or supportive for China.
Right.
So it is important for China to evade any situation that will consolidate other countries to join hands in China encirclement.
So obviously this power struggle between the two world superpowers is not just to them. The impact is not just to China or the U.S., but obviously with the efforts ongoing to involve North Korea to have successfully hold inter-Korean summit as well as the Trump-Kim summit, there are questions as to how this power struggle will affect the ongoing preparations for the summits involving North Korea.
I think, of course, there is a power competition, and the United States and China do not really look at each other eye to eye all the time. But as I said, that there are so much to lose if China and the United States dangerously elevate their competition and confrontation and drop their eyes on the ball, which is a denuclearization of North Korea,
Right.
but at the same time maintaining sustainable peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula without regime collapse of North Korea. So because the Chinese government has three major goals when it comes down to North Korea and Korean Peninsula. One is no regime collapse of North Korea, so that China will maintain North Korea as a buffer state vis-a-vis the United States, South Korea, and Japan
Right.
combined. And no nuclear proliferation in Northeast Asia, so that nuclear proliferation may encourage other countries like Taiwan and Japan, South Korea, trying to rearm themselves with the nuclear weapons, which will be a nightmare to Chinese security. And the third point is no more war. China does not want another Korean War to get involved. So in that regard, that China, United States may have some major differences in what kind of proposals should be made to persuade the Kim Jong-un regime of North Korea to do something about denuclearization. But they share these three goals, right?
Right.
United States always made a pledge that it has no intention to invade North Korea or initiate regime change by force. And it is in the interest of the United States to maintain sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula and preventing another war. If North Korean regime will take the Chinese step toward the economic opening and reform for prosperity, which is the one of the two major pillars of the Byungjin policy, simultaneous pursuit of nuclear development and economic development, then United States will have another big market to invest on the Korean Peninsula, and the improvement of the inter-Korean relations only benefits China as well. So minor differences, yes, but at the same time, on big picture, China and the United States share the same interest to prevent their differences in other areas from influencing their coordination of policies with regard to North Korea.
So where does South Korea come into this picture? I mean, with the upcoming summits and all, what kind of strategy should South Korea have in place in order to kind of have the upper hand in these matters concerning the Korean Peninsula?
I think Moon Jae-in government has been really smart and measured in terms of knowing what it can do and what it cannot do, despite its best hope. Meaning that so-called theory of South Korea being at the driver's seat does not necessarily mean that South Korea is going to monopolize all the decision powers when it comes to denuclearization of North Korea and prevention of military conflict on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea taking initiatives only means that South Korea will work as an honest broker and a trustworthy messenger between related parties. Good example is the deliverance of the important messages from the North Korean government to Washington, and being a good mediator between China and North Korea and the United States. And if there will be important progress with regard to North Korea cutting down or abandoning its nuclear programs and missile capabilities, then there will be international support to encourage North Korea's reform and opening. Then South Korea will play an important role as a bridge between North Korea as an undeveloped, uncharted economic territory with so much promising potential, and Japan. Because in order for North Korean regime to initiate initial stage of economic development, it has to follow the model of South Korea in 1960s. Like the former President Park Chung-hee signed the normalization treaty with Japan in 1965 and received the economic aid in the scale of $800 million US. And apply that money, the figure in 1965 to the situation in 2018, then it's a huge amount of money, seed money for North Korean economy to take off with. So with Japan, China, South Korea will play an important role as a new market for North Korea and supplier of the technology and know-how and the sophisticated workforce and investment as well.
A lot is in task for South Korea, it seems. Thank you so much for your insight today.
You're welcome.